Chapter 2. When Ralph awoke from his stupor, the feverish heat had given way to an icy chill and deadly weakness. His limbs felt leaden and refused to obey. With horror he saw, or thought he saw, blackish vapors rising from his hands and chest. A terrible despair and frantic terror of annihilation overcame him. He tried to seize the goblet, but could not lift his hands. He had hesitated too long. But no, he did not wish to die while salvation was at hand. Suddenly, all his willpower awoke within him. Summoning an almost superhuman effort, he rose, his chilled fingers grasped the goblet, and knocked the glass cover to the floor. A sharp, suffocating aroma struck his face and affected him so intensely that he felt as if he had inhaled life itself. His mind cleared and his breathing became free. Without hesitation, he raised the goblet to his lips and drained it in one gulp. At first he felt that he had swallowed liquid fire, and then something like an internal explosion occurred. His body seemed to dissolve into 1,000 atoms whirling in a sea of dazzling light. One thought, that he had been deceived and poisoned, flashed through his throbbing brain. Then, as if struck by lightning, he collapsed onto the pillows. How long Ralph lay unconscious, he could not say. When he opened his eyes, he remembered nothing of what had happened and imagined himself in London, in his small suburban apartment. With silent astonishment, he let his eyes wander over the heavy oriental draperies, the antique furniture, and other objects surrounding him in this entirely unfamiliar place. The sight of the empty goblet lying on the blanket quickly reminded Ralph of his extraordinary adventure. A sharp anguish and fear at the irrevocably committed, thoughtless act gripped his heart. Now he clearly recalled his arrival in the glaciers, the stranger's account, his agony and fear of death, which had driven him to drink the mysterious essence that had halted the decay of his body. The elixir indeed worked as Narayana had predicted, for Ralph felt stronger and healthier than ever. Vital warmth coursed through his veins, his lungs functioned easily, and his heart beat calmly and steadily. An irresistible desire seized him to see Narayana again and request further explanations. Ralph leapt from his sofa, washed, dressed hastily, and approached a dressing table in a niche he had not noticed before. Upon it stood a large mirror in a silver frame and lay a brush, comb, and other necessary articles for grooming. Ralph lit the candles in the two sconces attached to the frame and was about to comb his thick, dark hair when a glance into the mirror made him start and step back. Could it truly be him? The reflection of a handsome young man, full of vigor and energy, with eyes ablaze and lips tinged with purple, as if thirsting to drain the frothy cup of life to its last drop. Gone were the earthy pallor, the dark circles under his eyes, and the weakness that had prematurely bent his tall, slender frame. A miracle had occurred. He had become a wholly new man and felt inexhaustible life force coursing through his veins. Ralph quietly returned, seated himself in a chair, and leaned his head in his hands. The fear and despair that had gripped him in that black hour vanished, replaced by a strange serenity and deep bliss mingled with a sense of proud self-satisfaction. A moment later he rose, joyfully stretched his strong limbs, and left the room. He wished to see Narayana and ask him many questions that still seemed obscure, but he searched for him in vain. Seized by a heavy premonition, he hurried, almost running toward the ancestral crypt. This time he passed through the icy corridor without feeling the cold. It seemed to emit an inexhaustible stream of warmth, but he paid it no heed. with a heavy heart. He entered the hall where the ice sarcophagi of the mysterious men who had grown weary of life stood. One glance was enough to confirm that his premonition had not deceived him. In one of the tombs, empty just yesterday, lay Narayana. With a stifled cry, Ralph rushed forward and, bending over him, gazed at his beautiful, motionless face, on which a clear expression of triumph seemed frozen. Yes, he had penetrated the secret and voluntarily severed the astral thread binding him to indestructible matter. One day he, Ralph, would reach the same result and take his place beside the one who had initiated him. Overcome by sudden weakness, he leaned against his future grave and closed his eyes. He was seized by an inexpressible fear at the immensity of time stretching before him like an endless path. Oh, Narayana, why did you tempt me? Why did you leave me without telling me what this essence I drank is, what I must do to fill this abyss of time without losing my mind? He murmured with despair and anguish. Fill time with mental labor. Study the mysteries surrounding you and speaking to you through every atom. Seek truth in all forms. And then even eternity will not seem too long. Intoned at that moment a deep, hollow voice. Ralph shuddered and straightened quickly, looking with fear and amazement at a tall elder standing above Narayana's sarcophagus. The stern features of the stranger radiated calm. A large silvery beard spread over his snow-white tunic, and sparks flew from his bare body, forming a strange fiery halo. The elder's large, dark eyes studied Morgan inquisitively. I am the one who unveiled the secret and extracted from the cosmic chaos the primordial, creative essence which you have taken and which will make your body indestructible, for it will create in it ever new elements of life. But do not fear that you will live only for knowledge. Having drained the cup of pleasures, you will yourself seek the cup of knowledge. Know also that I watch over those who use my discovery. The elder stepped back, leaning against the icy wall, and seemed to dissolve like bluish vapor. Ralph was left alone. Now his mental state underwent a strange transformation. Anxiety, nervous despair, and fear of the future seemed miraculously dispersed, giving way to calm and energetic determination. With joy and gratitude, he felt the strength and well-being of a healthy man and had a burning desire to leave this icy wilderness and plunge into the whirlwind of life as a new being, powerful, wealthy, and armed with unknown and mysterious forces. For a moment, he again leaned over Narayana's motionless face, as if wishing to imprint his features firmly in memory. Be blessed for your precious gift, he murmured with gratitude. May your liberated soul find peace and happiness in the realms of eternal light. After a brief prayer, Ralph left the ancestral hall and went to the room where the treasures were kept. It was clear that Narayana had visited him once more, for on the table lay an open casket that the deceased had carried, and a large red leather portfolio, and a thick metal-bound book locked with a key sticking out. Ralph examined these items with curiosity and leafed through the yellowed parchment pages of the book, covered with strange, unfamiliar symbols. Then he opened the portfolio, which, besides a series of documents, contained a stack of photographs depicting the interiors and exteriors of two old castles, one on the banks of the Rhine and the other in Scotland. The latter particularly captivated the new owner. Like an eagle's nest, an ancient giant clung to a high, pointed rock, its battlemented walls, embrasures, and towers rising majestically. An ineffable sadness emanated from this deserted landscape, and from the mass of ravines and cliffs at the foot of which foamed turbulent waves. Evidently, Narayana loved these secluded places, far from men and the noise of society. Without doubt, from some balcony, he must have gazed at the abyss opening at his feet and at the endless ocean stretching before him, contemplating the strangeness of his destiny. And suddenly a vague premonition that solitude is an inevitable necessity for an immortal being crept into Ralph's soul, clouding the joyful trust that filled his entire being like a gray mist. Ralph tossed aside the photographs and took the wallet he had seen in his predecessor's hands. Within it lay a thick bundle of banknotes, addresses, and identification papers. At that moment, the doctor had no desire to examine these documents and slipped the wallet into his pocket. Then, taking from the hidden trove 2 small pouches of precious stones, he placed them along with the book and portfolio into the casket. He was hurrying to leave when suddenly a fear gripped him. What if he could not find the very complex path he had traversed with his guide? At that instant, a strange phenomenon occurred. As on a vast canvas, the route he was to follow appeared in his mind. Every ascent, descent, and turn was traced with such clarity that all doubt and fear vanished. Calm and filled with renewed energy, Ralph made the final preparations for his journey. Then he felt the desire to visit the platform once more and admire the wondrous view it offered. This time, the first rays of the rising sun bathed the glaciers, rocks, and distant valleys in gold and purple. Everything blazed and shimmered. The air was so pure and invigorating that Ralph inhaled it with delight. To breathe so freely and fully was a pleasure he had long been denied. A mad joy of life awakened in his soul. Oh, how well he had done to drink the reviving essence at the last moment. This rising sun seemed the very emblem of his joyful future. He would appear among men with renewed body and soul, wealthy and in a new social station. At this moment, life seemed unending happiness, and raising his hands high, he cried aloud, "Oh, Narayana, how could you part with the most precious of blessings and voluntarily enter an unknown world? Can one ever tire of life? Oh, never." Ralph shuddered and fell silent. Ah, ah, ah. A piercing, ominous laughter resounded near him, echoing across the surroundings and gradually fading into the distance. What was it? The spirit of the glaciers laughing, or some shepherd lost in a remote ravine? Ralph settled on the latter possibility, but his impulse immediately faltered. Slightly unsettled, the doctor entered the corridor to fetch his cloak and casket and leave this gloomy place as quickly as possible. At the door of the study, he was surprised to see a man leaning against the wall. As Ralph approached, the man stepped forward and stopped, crossing his arms and bowing his head in a posture of deep respect. Ralph recognized him as the servant who had accompanied Narayana to London. This servant had disappeared when they had gone on their excursion into the mountains. Now he remembered that this small man, with a sinister and piercing gaze, had made an unpleasant impression on him then, though he had soon forgotten him. The strange servant had exchanged a simple but elegant livery for a grayish-brown suit consisting of narrow trousers, pointed shoes, a jacket drawn at the waist with a copper belt, and a hood over his head. In this attire, the peculiar being resembled a living gnome, stepped from the pages of some fairy tale. "I greet you, my new master," said the gnome, bowing to the ground. "Be as considerate to Agni as Narayana was." "I will strive to satisfy you, Agni. But tell me, who are you and how did you come here?" Ralph replied kindly, placing a hand on Agni's shoulder. A heavy sigh escaped the dwarf's chest. Never ask me who I am or whence I came. I am a guardian of this place and depart only for a new master. What? So you too? Cried Ralph, involuntarily stepping back. Agni stopped him with a pleading gesture. I guard here a cursed secret and the remains of my lords, he murmured gloomily. Then, running a hand over his forehead, he added, I will serve you faithfully, await you, and whenever you arrive, you will always find everything ready. And her? Will you leave her here, master? They always take her away. Her presence only disturbs the peace of this place and attracts the spirits of the glacier. I do not understand. Of whom do you speak? Is there a woman here? Asked a startled Ralph. Ah, Narayana said nothing of her. In that case, master, allow me to escort you to her. She does not yet know that he is gone. Ralph ran a hand over his damp forehead. What was this? Was he dreaming, or had he lost his mind? In any case, it was too late to turn back, and he must learn the burdens of the inheritance he had undertaken. Evidently, it concerned a woman Narayana had taken from her family and now abandoned. Lead me to her, he commanded decisively. Agni opened a door at the end of the corridor, unnoticed before, and led him up a narrow spiral staircase to the second floor of the strange dwelling. They passed through a richly furnished, boudoir-like room. Agni drew aside a heavy curtain, and Ralph, dumbstruck with amazement, stopped at the threshold of a living room lined with striped silk embroidered with gold, furnished in an oriental style. Despite all the growing enchantment produced by the young woman, an icy shiver ran through Morgan's body, and a deep sigh escaped his chest. Nara watched him with a burning gaze. Her velvet eyes darkened and flared with fire. One could think she heard Morgan's thoughts and answered them. Suddenly, she leaned toward the young man and touched his forehead with her hand. Stop thinking and tormenting yourself with empty questions, my poor friend, she said, half in bitterness, half in mockery. Time, our great Lord and Master, will teach you to judge everything differently than you do at this very moment. For you are still under the influence of feelings, memories, and the beliefs of ordinary existence, short and shadowy like the life of a mere mortal. Perhaps I will tell you about Narayana someday, but not today. Now it is time for us to depart. Go and wait for me in the treasure room. I will change my costume and come to you immediately. Ralph silently bowed and went to the designated room. There he sat at a table where his cloak lay and the casket stood. Bowing his head into his hands, he pondered, trying to make sense of the myriad strange events that had occurred over the past days, in which he felt tangled as in a web. A slight noise broke his thoughts. He turned and saw Nara entering, fastening her gloves. The young woman wore a simple black wool dress, a jacket, and a black felt hat. In her hands, she carried a small leather satchel and an alpine walking stick. Around her neck, on a delicate gold chain, hung a lorgnette. In this outfit, she differed little from any other aristocratic woman traveling in the mountains. The black costume emphasized the beauty of her dazzlingly white face and ash-colored hair with golden highlights. You have not forgotten the way, Ralph Morgan? However, I know it well myself and can even point out the shortest route, said the young woman, a smile flickering across her face as she met the doctor's fiery, admiring gaze. I remember the way, but how do you know my name? As far as I recall, I have not once introduced myself, asked the surprised Ralph. Nara laughed mockingly. Must I not know to whom I am betrothed? From now on, you are Prince Narayana Supramati, and you may keep the name Morgan for when you need to remain incognito. Now let us go. Without a word, Ralph followed her. He began to feel a superstitious awe before this beautiful creature who seemed to hear his thoughts and read his desires. The descent was much faster than the ascent, and by nightfall Ralph and his companion arrived at the hotel where he had stayed with Narayana. It turned out the young woman had already taken a room there and even left her luggage. The next morning Nara emerged in deep mourning, fully wrapped in crepe, and they set off by carriage to the nearest station to travel by train to Venice. For Ralph, the journey felt like a dream. He only saw and heard his captivating companion. All his senses were heightened, and sitting in the compartment before the young woman, he drank in her beauty, forgetting everything else. Ralph only partially awoke from his enchanted dream when Nara touched his hand and smiled, saying, "Look, here is Venice." Ralph had always been interested in this unique city and longed to visit it, but he could never have imagined, even in a dream, that he would arrive as an immortal Indian prince. His old curiosity for the city was awakened, and he gazed out the train window with keen interest. At that moment, the train entered a gigantic bridge connecting Venice with the mainland and stopped at the station. As soon as the train doors opened, Nara nimbly jumped onto the platform. Seeing two footmen with braid, apparently searching for someone in the crowd, she turned to Morgan and said, "Here are our people. My telegram arrived just in time." At that moment, one of the footmen quickly approached and said with a deep bow, "The gondola awaits your grace." "Very well, Baptisto. Take care of the luggage. Let's go, brother." Nara took Morgan by the arm and headed to the quay, where they boarded a large gondola rowed by two men. Silently, they crossed the Grand Canal, then turned into a side lagoon and stopped at the doors of an extensive ancient palace. Night was falling. In the dusk, the ancient buildings lining the canal took on a particularly gloomy and fantastical appearance. Ralph was the first to jump onto the steps and helped Nara out of the gondola. They entered a vast vestibule lit by electric lamps. Several servants rushed to meet them and assisted with their coats. At that moment, as the young people entered the vestibule, an old man in black livery and silk stockings appeared on the wide marble staircase adorned with flowers and statues. The old man quickly descended and respectfully greeted Nara. She extended her hand for him to kiss and said in a voice choked with tears, "Today I bring sad news. My good Giuseppe, my beloved husband has died. Yet this beauty Nara is a consummate actress," thought Morgan, seeing her bring a handkerchief to her eyes and pretending to wipe imaginary tears. The old steward paled and large tears ran down his wrinkled cheeks. "Our good master has died?" he muttered. "Oh, what an unexpected misfortune. His grace seemed perfectly healthy. Alas, human life is so fragile. Later I will give you all the details of my husband's death. Today I am so broken and tired that I desire to be alone. Now I must introduce you to my son-in-law, your new master, Prince Narayana Supramati, the younger brother of my husband and his sole lawful heir. This is our faithful manager, Giuseppe Rosati. I entrust him to your benevolence, Supramati. I shall retire, thanking you for the help and support you have given me in my great misfortune." Morgan pressed her small hand to his lips and wished her a good night. Ascending a few steps, Nara turned again. "Giuseppe, escort the prince to the rooms of his late brother. I hope all is in order there?" "Oh, your grace. Certainly, all is in order. Could we have thought our good master would not return? Excellent. Make sure the prince is well served, and see that tomorrow the entire house dresses in mourning. With a graceful gesture, Nara ran up the stairs and disappeared into a side door. "Follow me, your grace," said the old steward, interrupting Morgan's thoughts, who was still trying to orient himself in his new position. "Hey, Grazioso and Beppo, see quickly if everything is ready to receive his grace." The servants vanished like shadows. Ralph silently followed the steward, who ascended the stairs and passed along a long gallery lit on one side by tall Gothic windows. "Here are your Grace's apartments," said Giuseppe, indicating a door at the end of the corridor. They passed through a whole suite of rooms furnished with royal luxury and so richly decorated with precious works of art that each seemed a small museum. Here is the late prince's study. This door to the right leads to the library, and to the left, the bedroom, said the steward while the servant Grazioso respectfully took Ralph's cloak and hat. Morgan looked around with curiosity. He was in a vast room paneled with black oak and strictly furnished. The upholstery and door drapery were of brown leather. On the large carved oak desk stood an inkwell of gold and lapis lazuli and a lamp with a blue shade, faintly lighting the spacious room. Through the open library door, carved shelves reaching to the ceiling could be seen, but at that moment Ralph paid them no attention. The young man went straight to the bedroom. It was smaller, lined with dark red silk, furnished with low soft furniture and a large canopy bed. "Would your grace like a bath to refresh after the journey, and then dinner?" asked Giuseppe. "Yes, I would gladly bathe and dine, provided it does not take long. Everything is ready. I will ensure dinner is served as soon as your grace leaves the bath." The servants led Ralph to a bathroom equipped with all the accoutrements needed for a nobleman's toilette, then to the bath itself, which with its marble walls, mosaic floor, large porphyry tub, and beautiful statues and niches positively dazzled the modest doctor, who felt as if in an enchanting dream. After the bath, the servants dressed Ralph in extraordinarily fine linen, and Beppo presented a beautiful plush robe lined with white satin. The late prince never wore this robe. He had it ordered only before his departure, noted the servants, explaining the surprised look of their new master, reluctant to wear a garment his late brother had not used. "Come now," said Ralph, putting on the robe, which fit perfectly. Then he went to the adjoining room, where a lavish dinner had already been served. Morgan was hungry and did full justice to the excellently prepared meal, proving that Narayana had good taste. "Give me the recent journals, and then, Beppo and Grazioso, you may go. I need you no longer today and shall sleep alone," said Morgan, pushing his plate away. Both footmen, like shadows, cleared the table, brought the journals, and left the room. When the door closed behind them and the heavy curtain fell, Ralph was finally alone. A sigh of relief escaped him, for the presence of the servants had weighed upon him. "Thank God, at last I am in my own quarters," he muttered. "Now the servants' presence will not prevent me from inspecting my new possessions. I hope I shall soon grow accustomed to giving orders and become a true nabob, the role I am to play." Ralph toured the rooms, examining the things, all of which seemed extraordinarily remarkable, and then returned to the study. Here, on the chair by the desk, stood the casket he had brought. Pulling a chair closer, he opened it and carefully examined the contents and papers more thoroughly than the first time. After completing this inspection, he wanted to place the documents in the desk, but it was locked. Then he saw a large carved cabinet and tried to open it as well, but in vain. Very displeased, he returned to the desk, suddenly recalling that he had seen a small golden key in one of the compartments of the large red portfolio. Ralph quickly retrieved it. The key did not fit the desk, but to the great delight of the doctor, it opened an antique cabinet with delicate lace-like carvings and countless drawers and compartments of all sizes. In the middle drawer lay two caskets and a bundle of keys. One casket was filled with gold and banknotes. The other contained precious items like tie pins, cufflinks, fobs, and more. Then Ralph began inspecting the other compartments of the drawers. In one, he found watches of all kinds and styles. In another, an entire collection of snuff boxes sparkling with diamonds. One compartment, arranged like a small cabinet, was full of various bottles, and on the inside of the door was written medicine. Finally, an entire half of the cabinet was filled with women's keepsakes, jewelry, fans, batiste lace handkerchiefs, jars, dried flowers, and a whole series of miniatures depicting charming female heads. Obviously, all this was the memory of Narayana's long and eventful life. Ralph locked the cabinet and returned to sit before the desk, which he opened with the keys he had found. In the middle drawer, he found a deliberately placed thick notebook in a binding. On the white sheet lying atop the notebook was written in broad, firm handwriting, to be read by my heir. Morgan shuddered. So, this man had thought of him without ever having seen him. Overcome with deep emotion, Ralph leafed through the notebook. It contained several chapters, their headings written in red ink with titles such as Magic Circle, Summoning Formula, Circle of Spirits, Inhabitants of the Realm of Silence, and so on. Morgan paused. He felt a cold breeze stir his hair and someone's icy breath touch his cheek. Seized by an unpleasant feeling, he snapped the notebook shut and threw it back into the drawer. Later, in daylight, he would read it carefully and examine the letters and papers stored in the desk, and probably elsewhere as well. In a few hours, it was impossible to get one's bearings in such a vast inheritance, especially one acquired so unexpectedly. Leaning back in his chair, Ralph gave himself over to contemplation. He could not yet get used to his new position, which had removed him from his modest working life and his ailing condition. Without any effort or merit on his part, some stranger had appeared and, like a fairy tale wizard, turned him, a modest doctor at a mental hospital, into a prince, a millionaire, a man full of health and strength, and, most incredible of all, an almost immortal man. The ultimate question of life, death, that faithful and terrifying companion, but also liberator, had been removed from his path, if not forever, since Narayana had died, then at least for an indefinite time. Death would not ambush him. Old age would not make him weak and decrepit, and disease would not poison his pleasures. Ralph quickly stood, approached a mirror, and examined himself as if he were a stranger. The person reflected in the glass could be pleased with himself. Ralph had not considered himself so handsome. With a childlike, naive satisfaction, he smiled at his own reflection and ran his hand through his thick, curly hair. Then he sank back into the chair. His thoughts now turned to the mysterious woman who had come to him as part of the inheritance, like everything else. His gaze fixed on the skillfully painted watercolor portrait of Nara, standing on the desk in a velvet frame. She was depicted in a ball gown. Her original beauty and the demonic look of her black eyes were rendered with extraordinary vitality. And this strange and charming woman would belong to him. As soon as the period of mourning ended, she would become his lawful wife before others. At the thought, his heart beat faster, and fire seemed to run through his veins. For a clock struck. The clock's chime tore Morgan from his thoughts. Weary in spirit, though not in body, he went to the bedroom and soon fell into a deep sleep. When he awoke, it was already late. With inexpressible pleasure, he stretched on the soft bed, his eyes wandering over the rich and comfortable surroundings. Suddenly, memories of his last months in London came to him. Sleepless nights, agonizing cough, sharp heart pain. How he had risen anxiously from bed, afraid of being late for the clinic, and returned home exhausted after a long walk or tram ride. The thought that this past was now over brought a sigh of relief. Quickly sitting up on the pillows, he pressed the electric bell. Immediately, two footmen appeared and helped him dress. As he washed, Ralph reflected that he had no spare clothes, and it would be improper to wear Narayana's wardrobe, even if it fit, as the late nabob's people might mistake him for a poor relative from who knows where. Considering all this, Ralph addressed Grazioso, the first valet, saying, "Send for the tailor who dressed my late brother immediately." The telegram summoning me to his deathbed was so sudden that I traveled light and must order a new wardrobe here. Meanwhile, give me some of Narayana's clothes. I'll see if I can wear them. A few minutes later, Morgan realized his predecessor had a magnificent wardrobe, made in the latest fashion, perfectly suited for him. While dressing, Morgan wondered whether Narayana had also preserved Roman, knightly, and other period clothes from his life. If so, this collection must be fascinating. He was nearly dressed when Giuseppe arrived. The old steward inquired about his knight and told him that her grace requested his presence at breakfast, wishing to introduce him to her acquaintances who, having learned of her grief, had come to express condolences. Ralph immediately went to his new mysterious fiancée and found her in the company of two ladies and three gentlemen, all apparently very upset. Nara also looked sad and distressed. She extended her hand to Morgan, then introduced him to the present Venetian nobility. "Allow me, my dear friends, to present the younger brother of my late husband. He also bears the name Narayana Supramati, though unlike the deceased, we call him by the last name only." The reception given to the late prince's heir was extremely courteous. Everyone repeatedly assured him of their friendship, high regard, and fervent desire to prove their goodwill. In these polite assurances there was such flattery and obsequiousness that Morgan felt disgust and accepted their words with cold restraint. Shortly after, all moved to the magnificent dining room, decorated in ancient Venetian style, and duly honored the splendid breakfast. Morgan did not need to entertain the guests, as they were preoccupied with him. Yet inwardly he admired the aplomb with which Nara improvised his biography and described her childhood relations with the supposed brother. The young woman told how Supramati, born from a second marriage, was much younger than the late Narayana, yet a tender friendship united the brothers, though they had not seen each other for years as the young prince traveled for pleasure across the world. Ralph's astonishment peaked when Nara invited the guests to verify Supramati's extraordinary resemblance to his late brother. When they agreed, and the ladies even found a remarkable confirmation of this similarity in his eyes and smile, the young man nearly laughed and felt repulsion. Clearly, his own identity disappeared in the aura of immense wealth, and human baseness, blind and deaf, cringed before this heap of gold. Ralph involuntarily glanced at Nara, trying to penetrate the depth of her thoughts, and with admiration saw that, despite her size and complaints, The burning eyes of the young woman looked at him in a way that showed she liked him very much. When everyone returned to the sitting room and the guests began to take leave, Nara announced that she would leave the next morning for several weeks to attend to her affairs. Finally, the young people were alone. Morgan followed his new fiancée onto a large open balcony overlooking the canal. Nara lazily sprawled on a low couch and fixed her gaze on Morgan, who leaned silently on the balustrade. My dear Supremati, you are awkward in your role and look somewhat wild in this new environment. However, I hope your silence will be attributed to grief for losing such a close relative, Nara remarked slightly mockingly. That's true. I feel as if in a dream, Morgan replied, running his hand over his forehead. However, he added with a smile, if my brother's death makes me silent, I have confirmed that your widowhood is no deeper. But enough joking. You do not mourn Narayana and apparently feel no sorrow. Have you been married long? Nara laughed a soft, piercing laugh that sounded unpleasant in Morgan's ears. Long enough to tire of each other. In ordinary life, a frivolous husband may weary a wife, but there, death resolves the matter for both. Imagine the situation of a woman bound to a husband, eternally young and strong, jealous, endlessly demanding, unfaithful, and selfish. Such a union could extinguish a whole volcano of passions and exhaust a camel's patience. And if an ordinary husband cheats thousands of times in 25 to 30 years of married life, imagine the list of infidelities for an immortal. As Nara spoke, an expression of sadness, contempt, and indescribable weariness clouded her face. Morgan's heart was filled with deep and sincere pity for this new companion of his now strange fate, for this mysterious inheritance from his benefactor. Leaning toward Nara, Ralph seized her hand and whispered passionately, forget the past, Nara. In the long life ahead, I will worship you, love only you, and devote all my strength to making you happy. A look of deep sadness passed over Nara's sensitive face. Do not swear, she said, shaking her head. You will not keep a single vow. Remember, our source of life energy differs from all mortals. In all other respects, you remain a slave to human weaknesses as before, except that for pleasures you are armed with unshakable health, unaffected by excesses and passions, and in addition, enormous wealth, allowing you to satisfy every whim. Yet you have not yet experienced the dangers of such a life. I understand that you doubt me, as you know very little of me. Does this distrust make you leave Venice? No, social etiquette requires our parting. I wish to spend my morning in solitude and, by the way, settle my affairs. Meanwhile, you should get used to your new life. Narayana's inheritance still holds many surprises for you. Also, learn how to use the mysterious powers at your disposal. Do not grieve, my dear fiancé, she added cheerfully. You will hear from me. When my mourning ends and I return, we shall celebrate a brief moment of delight and oblivion, deceiving ourselves about the duration of our happiness and imagining it as eternal as our life. But what does it matter? In the desert of life, one must not neglect even a moment of bliss. The steel day and night passed without bringing anything remarkable. Time went by in meetings with the tailor, inspecting the palace, and the most tedious conversation with Giuseppe Rosati, who handed him the expense books and accounts and began discussing various administrative matters. The next morning, Ralph took Nara to the station, but she did not tell him where she was going. Sad and upset, he returned to the palace, which seemed empty without her. After lunch, Ralph retired to his apartments, forbidding anyone to disturb him, and began examining various items in the bedroom, as well as the drawers of the desk. In one, he found a bound notebook, its pages filled with Narayana's handwriting. Flipping through a few pages, Morgan realized it was the late man's diary, in which he recorded, according to his fanciful impulses, incidents from life, various notes, and experienced impressions. The last pages were blank. Ralph felt the urge to read what this strange man had recorded last. Is there a more terrible disease than satiety? Narayana wrote, satiety is a gloomy melancholy that drives you from place to place, makes everything unbearable, and exhausts your patience. One labor can kill time. This dreadful giant, terrible with its dark and unknown future, its present ever slipping from underfoot, and its past inhabited by indelible memories. And yet the most terrible is the present. For if I can withdraw into the past or drift into the future, in the present I am everywhere confronted by people, these gnawing worms whose poisonous bites torment the soul if they cannot destroy the body. A vile, base, mercenary, and ungrateful crowd, flattering and cringing before the rich and trampling the poor, who cannot pay for their treacherous and deceitful friendship. Oh, this lie, elusive, pervading the very being of these contemptible and cruel people, who mutually hate each other, slander, tear each other apart, or snatch a piece of bread from one another, yet hypocritically embrace, bathing in this falsehood without which they cannot exist. Woe to him who must drag life with open eyes, free of illusions, seeing everywhere in families, between spouses, relatives, and friends the disgusting grimace of lies, understanding all the vulgarity, deceit, mediocrity, and malice of people, yet forced to remain silent. For who would understand him? Poor immortal, in the dreadful solitude of your abnormal existence. To escape from yourself, you fling yourself voluntarily into this crowd, eager to taste all its miseries, willing even to be deceived and betrayed, only not to be alone. For even love, that great engine sustaining humans in their fleeting struggle for life, becomes a merciless executioner for the eternal wanderer. Death itself mocks him. For boundless life, offer upon my altar all that you love. I know I can despise death and possess the means to snatch from its victims whenever I wish, yet I do not use it. I dare not condemn another being to the torment I feel myself. What I consider bliss turned out to be an unbearable burden. I have no more desires, no hopes. I no longer fight for a sacred goal, and humanity is a dead letter to me. And what is humanity to me? A fleeting crowd coming from an unknown cradle, rushing past like a whirlwind, then sinking into mysterious nothingness where there is never a lack of space. And always the same scene. Millions are born, struggle, suffer, and after this brief and pitiful life vanish, having done nothing. If the efforts of millions achieve nothing, what can one wretched soul do, who stands still in this and while others hurry past, striving to snatch from the pursued ghost of happiness some tuft of pleasure? A disgusting scene, especially for one who, removed from ordinary laws, observes from a bird's eye view the chaos of injustice and disorder teeming at his feet, unable to grasp the essential meaning of the mockingly cunning chance condemning genius and talent to languish in obscurity and starve in the slum, while mediocrity and ignorance, inflated with pride and vanity, ride the triumphal chariot, govern minds, increase disorder, and create bloody Saturnalia where innocent and useful beings perish, whom justice, if it existed, should have propelled forward to bring light, warmth, and wisdom to the world. And none of the victims shake off the grave dust to cry to the ruling infernal council. Vengeance. Indeed, great happiness lies in the fact that people, tormented by hunger and driven by need, have no time to ponder the meaning of things and the mysterious causes of their misfortunes. Exhausted, suffocating, and maddened by struggle, humanity has no time to reason or revolt. It rushes to the grave, giving birth to a new generation just as miserable and oppressed as their fathers and grandfathers. Oh, how I'm fed up with it all, how I am weary, how I wish to rid myself of the chains binding me to the body. Death, liberator, incomprehensible friend, I long to rest in your embrace. I want to be free. Pale, with a damp forehead, Morgan read these lines, evidently written at different times, under the impression of the moment, and the lines clearly portrayed the state of the soul of this man, who had seen all, tried all, and experienced all. An extraordinary case, it seemed, guaranteed him from all human woes, yet, overwhelmed by satiety, he longed for nothing but destruction. Will such an hour ever come for me? He asked himself sorrowfully. No, it is impossible. Life is the most precious gift, and the elder who instructed me in the gallery of ancestors was right in saying that even eternity will not seem too long to one who fills it with labor and deeds of mercy. I will not philosophize over humanity's misfortunes, but strive to help it. He concluded his monologue. Absorbed in his thoughts, Ralph did not notice the door open and a tall figure wrapped in a black cloak, face masked, enter the study. Only when the stranger laid a hand on his shoulder did he start and gaze in surprise at the visitor. Do not be afraid. Heir of Narayana Supramati, said the stranger in a deep voice. You must follow me, and your absence will last only a few days, but it is necessary. I am ready to follow you. I know I have entered a magic circle, winding around me like a serpent and placing duties I cannot avoid. Morgan replied calmly. Besides, I fear no death and can follow you without danger, he added with a slight smile. Very well. Make the necessary arrangements and come to me. I will be waiting in the gondola by the great staircase. Do not forget to wear the ring you found in the portfolio. Once he left, Ralph rang the bell. He ordered the servant who appeared to pack the most necessary things into a small suitcase and called for Giuseppe, announcing he would be away for 2 weeks. Then, slipping the ancient ring onto his finger and tucking a tightly stuffed wallet into his pocket, he left the room. Night had fallen. Despite the light illuminating the entrance, the gondola, swaying on the water, sank into darkness. At the stern stood a rower, and in the cabin with half-lowered curtains sat the stranger. Morgan placed his suitcase on the bench and sat beside him. The gondola immediately set off, gliding swiftly along the dark canal waters. The masked man remained silent. Morgan guessed he should do the same. He leaned against the cushions and pondered. Gradually, heavy drowsiness overcame him, and he closed his eyes. He could not say how long he remained in such oblivion. He was awakened by the voice of the masked man. Ralph straightened quickly, unpleasantly surprised. Despite the deep darkness of the moonless night, he saw they were in open sea and the gondola had reached a ship, tall masts and unfurled sails faintly outlined in the gloom. Come aboard, said the stranger. Morgan climbed onto the deck. a growing sense of dread seizing him. The sailing vessel was of a very ancient type. No sailors or passengers were visible, and only a smoking torch lit the cabin entrance with a reddish glow. Obeying his guide's silent gesture, Ralph descended the stairs behind him, and both found themselves in a richly yet strangely furnished cabin. The most diverse and heterogeneous objects were gathered here. In the center stood a table, abundantly set with wine and cold game. Wax candles in a small golden candelabrum illuminated the expensive dishes, seemingly collected at random, like everything else. Casting cloak and hat onto a chair, the stranger removed his mask. Morgan now saw he was a tall, slender man of about 30. His handsome, regular face was deathly pale, sharply contrasted by his black, crow-like curly hair and matching beard. The expression of his wide black eyes sent shivers down the spine, and bitter, severe lines marked the corners of his mouth. Despite the undeniable beauty of the man, he radiated something dark, full of despair, and Ralph felt an involuntary shiver of superstitious terror run through him. Suddenly Ralph shuddered. On the stranger's thin, gaunt yet pale dead hand, he saw a ring identical to his own, except that instead of a ruby, a sapphire sparkled. The stranger's attire also belonged to another age, a black velvet doublet, wide lace collar, and high boots. A dagger with an inlaid hilt protruded from the wide black sash around his waist. "Welcome, my brother. Sit," said the stranger, offering Morgan his hand. He grasped it and barely had time to ask the question on his lips when a heavy woolen curtain rose, and at the threshold of an adjoining small cabin appeared an even stranger face. The newcomer was an old man, at least 80, judging by the mass of wrinkles covering his face. His white beard reached his waist. His aquiline nose and piercing gaze of black eyes gave him the appearance of a predatory bird. The old man wore a wanderer's garb of black woolen fabric. His feet were shod in sandals, and his head covered with a small silk cap. His back was bent. In his hands he held a gnarled staff blackened with age, and on his wrinkled hand was a golden ring, like the other two, only set with an emerald. "Greetings to you, our younger brother. Welcome, Narayana Supramati," he said, shaking Morgan's hand. "I greet you too, brothers," Morgan replied, bowing. Seeing the identical rings, Morgan realized he was among members of a mysterious brotherhood, of which he had become a part without knowing it. Moreover, the eyes of his interlocutors burned with the same strange fire as the man who had initiated him. After a brief conversation in a language incomprehensible to Ralph, they all sat at the table. The younger stranger, seeming the host, filled the cups with wine and offered his guests food and drink. At first, all drank and ate in silence. Then Morgan raised his cup and said, "I drink this cup to your health, brothers, and I ask you to graciously accept a question I wish to ask." "Speak," both replied at once. "You know me, having named me," Ralph continued. "Yet I am wholly ignorant of those with whom I have the honor to speak. But I feel you are my new kin, beings who have found themselves in the same conditions as I, linked to me by mysterious bonds, for the same flame burns in your eyes as in the eyes of the late Narayana. You are right, my brother. We form one family. No matter the distance between us, we are united by mysterious ties," said the old man. "You have the right to know our names, but do not be frightened if they seem strange. Perhaps you have heard the name Ahasuerus? Ahasuerus. That name, legend says, belongs to the wandering Jew, murmured Morgan, astonished. In legend, there's always truth, distorted by human imagination and increasingly altered by time, remarked the old man. The wandering Jew, that is I, and he Everest indicated the dark-faced interlocutor, who leaned pensively on the table, is also a hero of legend, captain of the ghostly ship foretelling doom to passing vessels. This is the Flying Dutchman, as sailors call him. Morgan involuntarily rose, gazing at them with horror. He thought these legendary figures existed only in folklore, yet now he sat at the same table with them, unless, of course, these were pseudonyms hiding their true identities, as he himself hid under the name Narayana Supramati. If the old man spoke the truth, then these were exactly the phantoms that had terrified the world. One glance at them was enough to realize they were extraordinary men. We are not phantoms. We are children of fate and humans like you. And so you should not fear, said the one called the Flying Dutchman. Morgan was ashamed of his fear and said, wiping the sweat from his brow, forgive me, my brothers, my ridiculous fear in view of the strange and oppressive state of mind in which I find myself. Place yourselves in my position and imagine the feelings of a man of our unbelieving time, a doctor, a recognized skeptic, suddenly in such a strange environment. He involuntarily asks himself, am I drunk, mad, or the victim of a nightmare or hallucination? Morgan pressed his head with both hands. So do not be angry if I ask whether you truly are the people whose names you bear. For instance, Osiris, are you truly the man whom Christ cursed, if such a man ever existed? Yes, I am Osiris. I saw and knew Christ, but he did not curse me. For this divine bearer of the Father's goodness could only bless and forgive. Another reason compelled me to wander. Then where do you live? Asked Morgan, paling with excitement. I live nowhere. The entire world belongs to me. Leaning on this staff, shod in sandals, I circle the entire globe 7 times each century, always returning to my point of departure. The sky is my roof, the earth my bed, and plants my food. I rest only with the initiated every 10 years for 3 days and 3 nights. I need nothing. I flee from time, and it pursues me, concluded the old man grimly, leaning on the table. A deep crease cut across his wrinkled forehead, and a bitter expression appeared on his lips. After a minute of oppressive silence, the old man rose, drained his cup of wine, and, nodding to the young men, returned to the small cabin for which he had come. Morgan felt subdued and looked hesitantly at the remaining interlocutor. Despite the Dutchman's terrible pallor and fearsome gaze, he seemed far more sympathetic than the ominous Osiris. He longed to ask whether the legend making him and his ship harbingers of death was true. As if hearing Ralph's thought, he raised his head and said in a sonorous voice, later I will tell you why the sea became my field, the waves my homeland, and this ship my dwelling, where I live among books and my memories. I will also explain why I appear to those condemned to death. And you sail alone on this ship forever? Asked Morgan. Sometimes I go ashore to enjoy moments of fleeting love, which adds variety to my dark, monotonous life. But solid ground cannot hold me more than 3 days and 3 nights. Now tell me, under what circumstance have you become one of us? And are you happy to have received the precious gift that lifted you from the conditions of ordinary life? So far, I have experienced only one gift, restored health. Ralph briefly recounted his past life, then continued. I was dying of consumption and, sensing the approaching decay of my body, sought a way to penetrate the mystery of the afterlife. My soul felt the secrets and riddles hidden behind the coarse veil of ignorance in which humanity languishes. As a psychiatrist, I saw in the patients I could not cure some mysterious work occurring. Their bodies were healthy. Something invisible, elusive, suffered within them. It was precisely these hidden forces in this occult world, surrounding humanity on all sides and manifesting in the strangest forms, that irresistibly drew me. Afraid of the unknown abyss into which death casts us, I longed to know the path the soul follows, passionately wanting to know whether it experiences the body. Yet I was alone with my doubts, fears, and investigations. As a doctor, I was ashamed to admit to my unbelieving colleagues that I sought an intangible divine spark, eluding the scalpel. Did Narayana, through his apparent clairvoyance, know of my efforts, sufferings, and desire to help others? Only he chose me of all, granting me the precious and terrible gift of boundless life. Yet this is only my supposition. I do not know the true reason Narayana selected me and not another, more worthy person. Perhaps the bonds of the past connected you with Narayana. Ties created by love in past existences can be very strong and hard to break, remarked the Dutchman. However, do you not wish to rest? Morgan shook his head. The variety of impressions I have received today has driven away all sleep. If you are not weary and do not tire of my company, I would ask you to stay and converse with me. I confess, I very much wish to learn your true story. Moreover, I am curious why you brought me aboard your ship and introduced me to Azurus and where we are headed. We are going to the main residence of our brotherhood to celebrate one of our solemn centennial gatherings. There, in this mysterious sanctuary, rests the Grail Cup. What? The Grail exists? Asked Morgan with a skeptical smile. We exist. Why should not the cup exist, the sight of which, according to tradition, grants immortality? The name means nothing, replied the Dutchman solemnly. Now, if you are so interested, I will tell you my story, stripping away the legend that envelopes it. At the end of the 15th century, I was born to a famous pirate who had amassed considerable wealth through his plundering. My father was Dutch by birth, a stern, bloodthirsty, greedy, but excellent sailor. I grew up on my father's ship, learning the pirate's craft from childhood. I was 20 when my father was killed during the boarding of a large Spanish galley, and I inherited command of his ship. Soon I gained fame far surpassing that of my late father. All my ventures ended successfully. The speed with which I maneuvered and appeared where least expected surrounded my person and my ship with a supernatural aura, undoubtedly laying the foundation for my future renown. I was suspected of dealings with the devil. Though I was not a man who could meet the ruler of hell, my sailors, with their wildness, reckless courage, and bloodthirsty tendencies, could well be considered infernal spirits. Once, while navigating the North Sea, a lookout spotted a large merchant ship on a long course, and therefore heavily laden. I immediately ordered pursuit. The galley saw us and tried to flee under full sail. As expected, these efforts were futile. My swift ship caught up with the prey, and we rushed aboard. A fierce battle ensued as the galley carried armed men. Yet the desperate bravery of my crew brought victory. Leading by example, I was the first to leap onto the deck, my boarding axe wreaking terrible havoc among the ship's defenders. Engrossed in battle and covered in blood, I stormed into a cabin where I found an old man and a young girl nearly fainting from fear. I might have been satisfied with taking the old man prisoner if he had not fought back and wounded me in the shoulder with his rapier. Enraged, I smashed his head with a blow of my axe. When he fell, the young girl, screaming desperately, rushed to him. Only then did I see she was the most enchanting creature I had ever seen, fair and delicate as a fairy, with sapphire eyes and hair as golden as the sun. My heart immediately ignited. "Fear not, lovely child. Not a hair on your head shall fall," I cried. To protect her from the chaos of battle and the roughness of my sailors, I decided at once to carry her to my own ship. As I lifted her, she struggled wildly, then lost consciousness. In that state, I carried her to my cabin and locked her inside. Meanwhile, the battle had ended in complete victory for my men, and I could begin inspecting the loot. The haul was enormous. From one of the wounded sailors of a damaged crew, I learned that the galley belonged to one of the richest merchants of the Hanseatic city of Lubeck. This merchant was traveling to Venice with his daughter, fiancée of an Italian lord. The ship also carried the young girl's luxurious dowry. Several hours passed as we completed the inspection, division of the loot, and transfer of chests, boxes, bales, and other goods to our vessel. I was about to leave the galley, intending to sink it along with the prisoners, whom my men were finishing off, when suddenly an old man in a wanderer's garb appeared on the blood-stained deck. We were greatly surprised, for we had seen him nowhere before. Evidently, he had traveled as a passenger and hidden somewhere during the battle. The old man approached me, and with a strangely blazing gaze said, "Will you grant me, Captain, hospitality on your ship?" I was not of a soft heart, yet this old man, I knew not why, inspired in me a strange respect. Moreover, with his white beard and eagle-like nose, he reminded me of my father, whom I had loved dearly. And what could one man mean against 60 of my crew? I made a sign of consent and graciously replied, "Welcome aboard my ship, venerable elder. I will find a place for you, and there will be enough bread and wine to sustain you. If our bloody enterprise offends you, we will land you at the first opportunity." The old man thanked me, and I placed him in the same cabin now occupied by Uvarus. To rest from the day's toil, I ordered a grand feast. We had captured so much wine and provisions that the feast was magnificent. For myself, my assistant, and the old man, I ordered a separate table. The pirates feasted on the deck wherever they pleased. I was in the highest spirits, laughing, joking with the stranger, congratulating him on being spared the slaughter. He smiled and said he feared not death. I countered that I too feared not death, and my assistant and I vied to boast of our exploits. As I drank cup after cup, my blood began to burn. The beautiful fiancée, taken prisoner, grew ever more alluring, and I was seized by passionate desire to possess her. I rose and went to my cabin. The young girl had regained consciousness, sitting with her face in her hands. At my appearance, she stood and fixed a burning gaze upon me. I seated myself beside her, attempted to console her, and finally declared that I loved her, would keep her with me, and compel her to share our joyous and adventure-filled life. She listened silently, only her lips trembling nervously. She offered no resistance when I kissed her. Pleased by her submission and wishing further to soften her, I fetched a large jewelry box and presented it to her. The young girl feverishly opened the box and began rifling through it. Suddenly, a feverish blush spread over her cheeks. I thought a woman prized jewels above all else and barely restrained laughter. Then I ordered my beautiful captive to dress and join our feast. At first, she paled, a dark spark flashing in her sapphire eyes. Yet a minute later she replied in a low voice, "Bring me my clothes, for these are all blood-stained, and I shall come to you." I complied, and half an hour later she appeared on deck, arrayed like a queen. She wore a white gown embroidered with gold, a belt studded with pearls and diamonds, and a diamond diadem sparkled upon her head. I was astonished. Never had I seen such divinely beautiful woman. Yet what utterly enchanted me was her loose hair, cascading like a shining cloak almost to her knees. I seated her beside me, embraced her waist, and offered her wine. The young girl accepted the cup and seemed merry. She poured wine for me herself and accepted my caresses without visible repulsion. The revelry reached its height when Laura, that was the girl's name, rose, leaning over a large, recently brought amphora of wine, and said, "I wish to offer these brave sailors who shouted so loudly in our honor a drink. Let me pour their cups myself. Truly, they deserve your gratitude today, and you might grant them this favor. Do as you see fit, my beauty. Certainly, I shall not refuse your first request. Serve my men in health." I called a pirate and ordered him to carry the amphora behind Laura. She filled all the cups herself and offered them to the sailors to drink to her health. When Laura returned to the table, she was paler than her dress and seemed about to collapse from weakness. I anxiously asked if she was tired. She shook her head and answered with a strange smile, "Oh no, the feast is only beginning." At that moment, with her half-open lips, abrupt breathing lifting her virginal chest, and the ominous, devouring flame burning in her eyes, she completely enthralled me. Driven mad by passion, I seized her in my arms and carried her to my cabin, leaving command of the ship to my assistant. As for the stranger, he had long since departed, claiming fatigue. About an hour later, terrible screams and noise on deck tore me from my amorous frenzy. I immediately sobered and rushed upstairs. The scene that met my eyes froze me stone cold. My sailors, as if seized by sudden madness, rolled across the deck, growling like wild beasts, foaming greenish at the mouth. Some lay motionless, their faces blackened, appearing dead. At that moment, my assistant raised himself on an elbow, cried out, raising his fist, "Accursed! She has poisoned us." He too, in courtesy, had asked Laura for wine and drained a cup to her health. I realized he was right, and a furious rage against this woman, who had devilishly avenged herself by depriving me of all my faithful companions at once, seized me. I sought to draw the dagger always at my belt, but it was gone. At that moment, I felt a sharp blow in my side and heard a hissing voice. "Die, murderer, and be cursed. Let your accursed soul wander these waters forever without rest." I turned and saw Laura. Her face blazed, her eyes burned with wild hatred. She held my dagger, her hands and dress soaked with my blood. I raised my fist to strike her, but my arm fell powerless, and seized by sudden weakness, I collapsed on the deck. Darkness clouded my vision. Through a veil, I saw Laura lift the dagger and plunge it into her own chest. Then I lost consciousness. A fresh breeze on my face made me open my eyes, and I saw the stranger kneeling beside me. His fiery gaze seemed to pierce me. Suddenly, he murmured in a trembling voice, "Do you wish to live very long? Will you not curse me for it? Then I shall save you." I felt as if dying and with nearly superhuman effort whispered, "Save me, and I will bless you." Then Avarice, for this stranger was he, took a small vial of colorless liquid from his pocket, raised my head, and poured its contents into my mouth. It seemed I swallowed fire. Everything burned within me. Then I was struck as if by lightning. When I opened my eyes, I lay in my bed. A few steps away at the table sat the stranger, reading a long parchment scroll. I felt fresh, strong, and healthy as ever. Along with consciousness returned memory. Recalling the horrible deaths of my faithful companions, a hoarse sigh and a vile curse escaped my lips. The pilgrim immediately rose, approached, and said sternly, "Why do you meet your miraculous healing with a curse? Be grateful to heaven, my brother, that you feel strong and healthy. Look at the sole trace of that dreadful night." He threw back my shirt, and I saw on my side a broad blood-red wound covered with thin, transparent glass-like skin. "And has this mark remained visible long?" Morgan asked with curiosity. "It is visible to this day, though more than 3 centuries have passed," replied the Dutchman. With these words, he unbuttoned his coat, threw back his shirt, and showed Ralph the strange mark, indeed resembling a fresh wound covered with a skin-like transparent layer. The sight of this strange mark made a most dreadful impression on me at the time, and I felt an inner weakness. Then the pilgrim laid his hand on my shoulder and said, "This bloody mark must forever remind you never again to take up arms to kill your neighbor. Enough blood and crime. From today you cease to be an ordinary man. You have crossed the mysterious threshold that makes every human life transient. Boundless life awaits you. But to become worthy of it, renounce your past. With repentance and prayer, you must erase the traces of your crimes. You need no longer live by robbery and murder, for I shall grant you wealth, and then take you to a place where you will be received among the members of a mystical and mysterious brotherhood." As he spoke, a profound sadness took hold of me. My past, full of adventures, immediately faded, and with vague foreboding, I longed for something new and unknown. "I will do all you command, mighty teacher, master over death," I said, bowing my head. Then I rose, dressed, and expressed a desire to go on deck. The pilgrim consented, and we ascended the stairs. The hideous and sinister scene of the deck, lit by smoking torches, filled my soul with horror and despair. All my sailors were dead, strewn about, their blackened, distorted faces frozen in expressions of terrible agony. Only yesterday these brave men thronged around me, full of life and courage, and today all that remained were blackened, bloated corpses, struggling to suppress the fury raging within me. I said to the old man standing beside me, "We must throw the bodies overboard and clear the deck." I bent to lift a corpse to toss it, but Osiris restrained my hand. "Leave it and do not soil yourself by touching these unclean bodies. Let us wait until nightfall, then it will all be done of itself. See, day is already coming. Let us return to the cabin. For today we must devote ourselves to preparing for the new conditions of your life." We returned to the cabin. The stranger ordered me to gather and remove all unnecessary items. Then he draped the windows with thick fabric, completely blocking the light, and lit a wax candle standing in the corner on a small table. Having completed these preparations, he commanded me to kneel in the center of the cabin, while he first traced circles in the air and then on the floor, enclosing us both within them. To my amazement, I saw that beams of fiery light emanated from his staff, forming a sparkling ribbon suspended in the air. On the floor, small tongues of flame flickered. Then the old man drew from behind his belt a small bundle containing a square piece of red cloth and a grayish sphere made of a substance unknown to me. Placing the cloth and sphere upon my head, he ordered me to pray. But I did not know how, for the prayers my late mother had taught me as a small child I had completely forgotten, and my subsequent wild and criminal life had made me an atheist. When I confessed my ignorance, the stranger began to recite words that I was to repeat after him, which I later memorized. In this prayer, I implored the Almighty to have mercy on my wicked deeds. As I recited this prayer for the first time, I felt terrible pain throughout my body. It seemed as though daggers pierced me from all sides. Then this physical pain vanished in a horror unlike anything I, a bold pirate, had ever experienced in my life. Beyond the fiery circle enclosing me and the pilgrim, pale, blood-soaked creatures with distorted faces began to appear. My blood froze when I recognized in them the people I had killed. The crowd of my victims grew ever larger, yet the stranger seemed to pay them no heed. He intoned words in a measured rhythm in a language unknown to me. Suddenly, a snow-white chalice appeared in the air. This chalice, like a shimmering cloud, hovered above our heads, and above it shone a broad golden cross. The entire vision was surrounded by multicolored flames. Yet at that time, I perceived it as in a dream. All my attention was focused on the loathsome horde creeping toward me from all sides, intent on seizing me. The phosphorescent eyes of the ghosts burned with wild hatred. Horrible blasphemies and curses rang in my ears, and long arms with hooked fingers seemed ready to grasp me. What I endured in that dreadful hour defies description. It was pure agony. I can boldly say that then I experienced in succession all the deaths I had inflicted. Overcome, driven mad with terror, I clung to Verisrobe, who, with a thundering voice, commanded the suffering shadows, pointing to the cross and speaking of forgiveness. Little by little, some of the spirits paled and vanished into the darkness, but the most malevolent continued to cry, "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Let him suffer. Let him be cursed, cursed. Let him, knowing no rest, wander the waters he has defiled with his crimes. Let him, hated and reviled, be tossed upon the waves of our blood." Finally, the last vengeful spirits disappeared, and I, broken, sank powerless at the old man's feet. But my rest was brief, for suddenly I felt a strange and painful vibration shaking my entire being. With fresh horror, I saw red, wet, sticky, and foul-smelling sweat exuding from my body with a whistling and groaning sound. My breath caught, and I fell as if dead. When I regained consciousness, the chalice and fiery circles had vanished. Ahasuerus knelt beside me, wiping my hands, face, and chest with a wet cloth. Then he helped me rise and lie in bed. "I have partly purified you and drawn from you the fluid of your committed crimes, but I could not remove the curses of your victims or the hatred you instilled in them. Your enemies will pursue you. Pray and repent, and perhaps your full liberation will be accomplished. Now sleep and rest. Tonight we still have a heavy duty to perform." I was so exhausted that I immediately fell into a deep sleep. I was awakened by piercing, ominous, prolonged bell sounds, as if tolling for a funeral. Bathed in cold sweat, my heart trembling, I rose from bed. But no, it was not a dream. The bell really rang, overpowering the noise of the storm that had raged during my sleep. The wind whistled through the rigging, bending the masts and causing the hull to creak. Thunder rumbled in the distance. I sprang from the bed in anxiety. What would become of us? How can we navigate without a crew? Ahasuerus' arrival interrupted my thoughts. Follow me. We must bury your pirates, he said. I followed him mechanically. Night had fallen, and only the flashes of lightning illuminated, from time to time, the pile of corpses on the deck and the raging sea. I had never seen such a storm. The wind's whistle almost drowned the peals of thunder and the roar of the waves, which, rising like mountains, seemed every moment ready to swallow our ship like a nutshell tossed by their foamy crests. Yet still we sailed under full sail. To complete the horror, wandering lights ran across the deck above the corpses, and the tall figure of the old man, hands raised, illuminated by lightning, looked fantastical and dreadful. Suddenly, a greenish light arose from the ocean, like a halo encircling the ship, bathing it in a pale glow. At the same moment, I saw on the crest of a large wave a bell, as if cast from molten metal. Beside it stood a black, vaguely outlined figure. Only the angular, earthy-colored face of this figure was clearly visible, with green eyes full of hellish malice. This loathsome being held the rope of the bell and struck it slowly. The ominous, moaning, plaintive, yet piercing sounds, blending with the storm, created such a harrowing impression that even now I cannot recall them without shuddering. Ahasuerus, too, was horrified. His head, beard, and hands glowed with a phosphorescent light, and his sonorous voice rang piercingly and commandingly as he spoke words in a language unknown to me. Suddenly, a dreadful vision appeared to my eyes. The pirate corpses rose one by one, silently leapt overboard, and gathered around the bell, which continued its funeral toll. By the light of a fiery lightning flash, I clearly saw the entire group rocking atop the enormous wave. Their greenish faces with glassy eyes were turned toward me, then all paled and seemed to vanish into the raging ocean waves. Staggering like a drunken man, I tried to descend to my cabin and took several unsteady steps. My ears rang, fiery sparks flew before my eyes. It seemed to me that the corpses of my companions danced around me in a hellish round, and with a muffled groan, I fell onto the deck. Chapter 4. How long this unconscious state lasted, I cannot say. It was something strange, neither fainting nor sleep, but a kind of heavy stupor devoid of thought and feeling, yet from time to time disturbed by revolting visions. When at last I opened my eyes and returned to full consciousness, it was already day. Sunlight flooded the empty deck, yet everything was so clean and orderly as if one of the most terrible dramas had never taken place here. I myself lay at the base of the mast, fresh and vigorous in body, but strangely weary in soul and with a heart pressed by sorrow. Although no one was at the helm, the ship sped swiftly over the waves, evidently maintaining a set course. Leaning against the rigging stood Ahasuerus, gazing thoughtfully and sadly at the ocean. The noise I made when I rose caused him to turn. "Greetings, my brother," he said with a smile. "As you see, all is well. Moreover, I am pleased to inform you that we are on our way to the meeting place of all our brethren." I thanked him and inquired whether we would soon reach our destination. Ahasuerus replied that we would arrive once my preliminary purification was complete, as well as that of another person on board. Seeing my extreme surprise, he said, "Yes, yes, we have a third passenger here. Kulme, I will now show you him." We descended into the small cabin formerly occupied by my assistant, and I found myself face to face with a woman who had dealt me a mortal dagger wound. She was in mourning and so frightfully pale that it seemed no drop of blood ran in her veins. Apparently embarrassed, she stood before me, eyes downcast, her entire being exuding gloomy sorrow. I looked at her with such calm that it surprised even me. I felt not the slightest anger or hatred toward her. On the contrary, I fully recognized that all the blame lay with me, and almost involuntarily said, "Forgive me. Forgive each other mutually," said the elder. "You have both sinned, both committed murder, and upon both weigh curses that will bear bitter fruit. For a law once set in motion must inexorably be fulfilled. At last, the same fate binds you, suffering and wandering, to this land." With a heavy heart, I approached and repeated my request for forgiveness. She extended her hand to me and raised her beautiful eyes to mine, assuming that strange expression which we all bear, we who shall not die like others. Peace was thus established between us. From that day, we three lived on the ship, which I no longer steered, but which, as at this very moment, was guided by invisible hands. Part of the day and night Laura and I spent performing the ritual prescribed by Ivaris, in which he himself also participated with his incantations and strange chants. Hours of rest we spent on the deck, in dreams or in conversation. Laura and I became friends, yet with each passing day, we grew less communicative. As my purification progressed and my mind developed, I was increasingly overcome by deep sorrow and indifference to life. The stormy life of murder and robbery seemed a dreadful dream. Visions that sometimes tormented me made me fear death. Yet, despite this, I still could not believe in the endless life of which Ivarus spoke. More than 2 months passed in this way. At last the elder announced that we had sufficiently purified ourselves to be admitted to the sanctuary, and that on that very night we would arrive there. We were on the open sea, but where? I could not orient myself, for we had not encountered a single ship, and the ocean seemed to have become a desert. A strong curiosity seized me. At last we would reach shore, and I would see where we were. I did not leave the deck. Night came, yet the desired shore still did not appear. Finally, by the pale moonlight, I saw high black cliffs rising from the waves. As far as I could judge, we were approaching some island or large desolate reef, for there was no visible vegetation. Approaching a huge pointed cliff, the ship stopped and touched the gray rock with its side. The elder went to the side and shouted loudly 3 times, "Ahasuerus!" The echo repeated the name 3 times. Inside the cliff, a bell seemed to sound. At that same moment, a strange phenomenon occurred. As if pushed by invisible hands, the granite mass slid aside, revealing a hollow. Then a massive block shifted and opened a vaulted gallery, in which 12 steps covered with carpet were visible. On the top step stood 2 boys in white garments, holding lamps that emitted a dazzling light. Already familiar with electric lighting, you, of course, would not be surprised when we arrive. But I, a simple and wild sailor of the 15th century, thought I saw a heavenly light. Ahasuerus stepped down first, and Laura and I followed him. We all entered the gallery carved into the rock. When I looked back, I saw that the opening had silently closed behind us. We followed Ahasuerus in silence, and finally found ourselves in a small circular room, for which similar galleries extended in various directions. In the center of this kind of antechamber stood a tall elder in white garments that gleamed as if studded with diamonds. At his waist was attached a broadsword, and on his chest, beneath his long silvery beard, shone a golden breastplate adorned with precious stones. His feet were shod in white slippers with upturned toes. The elder embraced Azurus and cast a long, searching glance at us. Then, after exchanging a few words with our guide, he raised a small ivory horn to his lips and sounded a piercing note. At this summons appeared a boy dressed in white, like those who met us at the entrance, and he led me along one of the galleries to a luxuriously furnished room, where a bed had already been prepared and a meal laid out on the table. Refresh yourself and sleep. When the time comes, I will come for you, said my guide, and left the room. I ate with an appetite I had not felt for a long time. I also felt much better. The air here seemed lighter, cleaner, and somehow saturated with life-giving fragrances. I felt the desire to live rekindle within me. Having satisfied my hunger, I began to examine the room assigned to me. The room I was in was evidently a grotto adapted for habitation. The furnishings were very rich, yet their forms were unlike anything I had ever seen. The draperies were made of some unknown material, as if woven from metallic threads. Assuming one of the curtains concealed the entrance to an adjoining room, I lifted it, and a cry of admiration escaped my lips. I stood before a window pierced in the rock. From this window opened a positively magical view of a deep inner valley, surrounded on all sides by immense cliffs. Above the dark mass, like a deep blue dome, stretched a star-studded sky. The depth of the valley was filled with a lake, in which the full moon reflected like a mirror. Around the lake ran deep, oddly shaped grottos, illuminated with a gentle bluish light, their depths sinking into mysterious half-darkness. In one grotto could be seen steps of a narrow staircase carved into the rock and disappearing under the vault. Boats were moored in many places. Two large white swans glided smoothly over the dark, still water. The entire landscape exuded an indescribable peace and had a soothing effect on my troubled and agitated soul. Only after fully enjoying the contemplation of this enchanted scene did I lie down and immediately fall asleep. I was awakened by my little guide, who offered me to dress. He led me to the adjoining room, where I bathed in a basin made of blue stone and filled with aromatic water, then dressed in the same attire as the elder who had received us. Then my little page girded me with a belt, though without a sword, and placed around my neck a chain adorned with black diamonds, from which hung a red enameled pentagon with a transparent stone in the center containing what seemed like a tiny flame. Examining me carefully, the boy shook his head and remarked, "How much blood is on you, my brother?" Noticing my agitation, he immediately changed the subject, showing me a large embossed silver chest inlaid with turquoise, where I was to keep the garments I had been given. I could use these clothes whenever I came here. Then he lit a candle, and we went out. I followed him in silence. We passed through several galleries. At the end of one, a massive door opened, and I found myself in a vast hall. Cascades of golden light seemed to pour from the dome, reflecting on the marble tiles and mosaic floor. At first, I could see nothing as I felt dizzy. My heart seemed to stop, and my breath was taken away. I would undoubtedly have fallen if a strong hand had not supported me. Later, I learned that the mighty emanations filling the sanctuary always have this effect on any sinner entering, covered with crimes. When my dizziness subsided, I saw that Ahasuerus supported me, whispering encouraging words. He was dressed as I was, but his head was adorned with a thin golden circlet with a star above his forehead that emitted bright rays. Somewhat reassured, I knelt and looked around. First, I noticed men in white garments and women with veiled faces grouped on both sides of the hall. All were kneeling in prayer. I also saw that the dome was open and that the cascades of light flooding the sanctuary were nothing other than rays of the sun. At the far end of the hall rose a roofless pavilion made of silver fabric, supported by lapis lazuli columns. The front of the pavilion was entirely open. Steps led to a large throne, upon which wax candles burned in a golden seven-branched candelabrum. In the center of the throne rose a large cross, above which hovered a dove with outstretched wings. At the base of the cross was a huge chalice, surrounded by a phosphorescent glow. On the carpeted steps of the throne stood a tall elder with a white beard, dressed like us, except that his garments were made of a different glittering fabric, which emitted multicolored rays with each movement. On the head of this high priest was a crown with 7 points, each topped with a small flame. In his hand he held a short, broad sword with which he traced mysterious signs in the air. On either side of the throne, only on the last step, stood 2 knights, one in golden armor, the other in silver. They held swords with cross-shaped hilts. Their raised visors revealed beautiful, stern, and serene faces. I was entirely absorbed in the contemplation of all this when, suddenly, from I know not where, a majestic singing arose, accompanied by organ sounds. The melody was very strange, but one must experience it to understand the extraordinary effect this music produced. What happened to me then, I cannot even describe. It was the upheaval of my entire being. Something within me expanded, separated, opened. Every nerve of my being trembled and rang. Suddenly, I burst into convulsive sobs, and streams of tears gushed from my eyes. At that moment, Azira's hand rested on my head, and he murmured in a soft, sympathetic voice, "Cry, my poor brother, lament the sins committed, the spilled blood, and the imperfection that binds us to matter." I cannot say how long I remained on my knees, overwhelmed by the consciousness of my wretchedness, my soul yearning for the heavenly homeland. I can call this strange, sorrowful feeling nothing else, without complaint or murmuring, mingled with an ineffable longing for peace, perfection, and light. These feelings, evoked in me by the wondrous music I had never heard before, killed the old man within me. I rose as a completely new being, repentant and thirsting for perfection, yet shattered by spiritual suffering. At that moment, the 2 knights, standing by the altar, brought a large golden chalice and, kneeling, held it with both hands. Then the high priest descended the steps, carrying a small crystal cup filled with a blood-colored liquid and a golden spoon. With this spoon, he scooped red liquid, according to the number present, and poured it into the large golden chalice. Taking the crystal cup to the throne, the high priest again descended the steps and began calling each person forward. They approached, and he poured a little of the liquid over their heads. At last he called Azirus, Laura, and me. Hearing my name, I trembled, but Azirus took my hand and led me to the high priest. Introducing us, he recounted our story in detail and asked the high priest to accept us. The high priest nodded assent. Then, after pouring the mysterious liquid over Azir's head, he signaled me to come forward. "The sins you have committed are great, and the curses weighing upon you are dreadful," said the high priest in his deep, calm voice. "Until you are completely purified, you cannot dwell among us without disturbing the divine harmony of this sacred place. Until the last curse is lifted from your head, I can only allow you to appear here once every 7 years, to attend the divine service and to rest and regain your strength for 3 days and 3 nights. After that, you must again wander the waves, labor, repent, and make amends for the evil you have done. Kneel. He poured the liquid over my head, and I felt as if my skin were burning. Then he took a dagger from a golden dish presented to him and handed it to me, saying, I arm you with this magical weapon so that you may defend yourself against suffering and vengeful spirits that will pursue you. Remember, you may use only this weapon. Here it is, added the Dutchman, pointing to the hilt of the dagger tucked at my waist. After a moment's reflection, he continued, when I tucked the dagger into my belt, the elder placed this ring on my finger and said, receive this ring as a sign that you belong to the brothers of the round table of eternity, and at the same time receive the name Dehira, under which you shall be known in the brotherhood. When despair and loneliness on your cursed ship drive you to desperation, you will ring the bell, and its sounds will reach our ears, and we will support you. Moreover, you may occasionally go ashore and mingle with people, but no longer than 3 days and 3 nights. Now go and enjoy in the remaining time the company of your new brothers. Kissing the elder's hand, I rose. Pale and distressed Laura approached him. You yielded to blind hatred and a thirst for vengeance, unworthy of a Christian, which led you to murder people. Indeed, corrupted and unworthy ones, but whom you were not to judge. Curses weigh upon you. You yourself shall bitterly lament the blasphemies with which you defiled your lips, and the curses you cast upon the man here will continue to separate you for a long time. For your crimes, I must sentence you to solitude. You shall remain here, but will not see us until the blood you shed and the curses you uttered are atoned for. You will be shown a place where you will live alone, praying, repenting, and purifying yourself. Your appearance will bring misfortune to all mortals who see you. Therefore, beware of showing yourself to anyone, so as not to increase the number of your victims. For 3 days we lived in this mysterious palace, all the inhabitants of which, never having left this place of peace and happiness, treated us as brothers. Most of the day, the brothers of the higher degrees devoted themselves to labors to which I was not admitted. At the appointed time, everyone gathered in the hall, which you yourself will see supramati. There, on a large round table, stood a golden chalice, always full of an unknown substance. This chalice passed from hand to hand, and each took a sip. On the third evening, there was a great service with singing in the sanctuary where the Grail cup is kept. Forgive me, brother, interrupted Morgan. You have mentioned the Grail several times as if it were something real and tangible. Yet it is established that the story of the Grail is a poetic fiction, probably originating in Provence and celebrated by Wolfram von Eschenbach, a 13th century troubadour knight. Dehir smiled. The story of the Grail, as told by von Eschenbach and before him by the Proselyte de Provence, Crétin de Troyes, and others, is, of course, poetic fiction, yet the foundation of the legend, mentioning the existence of the Elixir of Life, is a truth in which neither you nor I can doubt. No matter how carefully the brothers of the Round Table of Eternity guarded the secret, some knowledge still became known. From the depths of centuries, passed from people to people, colored by the customs and beliefs of bygone times, this legend, already supplemented, altered, and distorted, reached the Middle Ages, when von Eschenbach and his predecessors gave it a Christian tint. The essence of life becomes the blood of the Savior. The vision of the cup gives immortality, and our secret refuge becomes the unattainable temple of the Grail sought by the knights of the Round Table. If the Celtic, Norman, or even Provençal poems had reached you in their original form, you would have found clearer traces of the origin of these legends. But all of that perished. The last remnants of the original tales, preserved by the Albigenses, were destroyed by the Inquisition. Only some medieval German poets' work survived. If I call our brotherhood the Brotherhood of the Grail, it is merely to use a name already familiar to you, derived from the word sangreal, meaning sang royal, royal blood. This allegorical name is quite accurate, as the essence of life is indeed the royal blood of nature. Thank you for your explanation, brother. Now, please continue your fascinating story, said Morgan. It is already nearing its end. Leaving the sanctuary, still in great excitement, I saw Laura. She approached and offered to show me the place assigned for her solitary life. I gladly agreed. Laura led me to the lake's shore, and from there, in a small gondola, we reached a staircase leading up to a vast grotto. From one wall sprang a fountain, filling a large stone basin with crystal water before disappearing with a roar into a rock fissure. In a recess on the other side were a bed and a table, on which lay a large book, an amphora, a cup, and candles. In one of the rock's recesses, a cross was fixed, before which a lamp burned. This is where I am condemned to live. Each week, a young temple attendant will bring me food and fresh clothing. In this basin, I may bathe. The rest of the time, I must study this folio, said Laura, her lips trembling. Tomorrow, she added, the path leading to the lake will be closed. To breathe fresh air, I must climb up there. Laura pointed to a spiraling staircase I had not noticed before. We climbed it and reached a small platform at the cliff summit. From this dizzying height, the desert ocean stretched to the horizon, and at our feet my ship, with sails unfurled, rocked coquettishly on the moonlit water. An ineffable sadness gripped my heart. Surely Laura felt the same, for she suddenly sank to her knees, clutching my hand, and cried in a voice choked with tears, "Take me with you to here. In this terrible solitude, with such endless and monotonous life, I will lose my mind. I prefer to be with you on the ship and share your wandering life." She was so divinely beautiful in her despair that my heart trembled. Certainly, if she could be my companion in my lonely cabin, half the horror of my future would be alleviated. Yet I knew I had neither the right nor the ability to fulfill the wish of the unhappy one I had driven to the abyss. I lifted Laura, firmly shook her hand, and said, "We will not ease our fate by disobedience. No, Laura, we must follow the path shown to us by our teachers, and each of us must patiently and humbly bear the trial laid upon us. In 7 years, I shall return. By then, I hope repentance and prayers will have erased some part of our crimes." Laura rose, pale but submissive to her fate. "You are right to hear. I obey and will wait patiently, for after all, you're the only person I know here." I left. In a large antechamber, all the Grail brothers had already gathered. Azurus wore his traveler's attire, and all departing had also removed their white and shining tunics. We embraced one last time. Then the opening in the rock opened, and I saw my ship, as well as another vessel that would no doubt carry the others. With a heart pressed by longing, I hurried onto my ship. Azurus followed, and the vessel immediately departed. For a moment, I saw Laura's white figure atop the cliff, bathed in moonlight. Then all vanished in the mist. With a heavy heart, I descended to my cabin. Here I realized that the ship's interior had undergone a significant transformation. All the space between decks, once occupied by my sailors, had been divided into several cabins. In the largest was a table on which lay a large black-bound book. In the back, on a pedestal, rose a cross. At its base burned a lamp radiating dazzling light, and nearby hung a metal bell. Finally, off to the side stood something large, covered with black cloth. I examined these things in astonishment when Ahasuerus entered the cabin. "I have come, my brother, to give you the necessary explanations," he said. "The book you see contains the first initiation. You must study it for 7 years and know it thoroughly by the time you return to the sanctuary. If you ring the bell, its sounds will connect you with the Grail Palace, and you will receive the teacher's response. Before the cross, you must recite prayers of purification. The lamp is magical and will burn unextinguishably for 7 years." Finally, he removed the cloth and revealed a metallic plate reflecting all the colors of the rainbow. "This is a magical mirror in which you will see all ships doomed to destruction. You shall appear to them as a messenger of misfortune and death, but your duty is to strive by all human means, without revealing yourself, to save even one of the shipwrecked. You risk no life, yet you will bear all the inconveniences, fatigue, and efforts of an ordinary sailor, sacrificing himself to save another." The next morning, I was already alone. My ship, guided by invisible hands, raced over the waves with sails unfurled, defying storms. Even in the fiercest tempests, it danced coquettishly on the crests of the waves. Once, during a terrible storm, I felt an irresistible urge to look into the magical mirror. I removed the cloth. At first, I saw nothing. Only distant cries of horror reached my ears. Then, in the depth of the shining, multicolored disk, like in a painting, a storming ocean and a large galley with broken masts, clearly in grave danger, emerged. I realized that I was presented with one of the rescue opportunities Ahasuerus had spoken of, and quickly ran onto the deck. My ship sped across the turbulent waves with incredible swiftness, and soon I saw the sinking vessel, past which we passed, almost touching its side, as if a vision. When we disappeared from a view of the doomed, my ship stopped. I entered a small boat and with great difficulty reached the wreck's site, where debris floated in the water. I managed to save 2 children. Unable to keep them aboard, I landed them on shore at the first opportunity, providing them abundantly with gold. Since then, as I've already told you, I have led the same monotonous and solitary life. I studied the great book extensively, which you too will have to study, for the elixir of life is given not only to live and enjoy, but requires from its adepts the same long labor as the life it grants. You too, Supremati, will discover in this book astonishing, dreadful secrets, and a new world will open before you. But I have no right to tell you more at this moment and disturb you prematurely." Tahir fell silent and leaned thoughtfully on the table. Morgan was also silent, his mind crowded with conflicting thoughts. For minutes he questioned himself whether he had gone mad and whether this fantastical world, where all that proud 19th century skeptics regarded as meaningless tales took flesh and blood, was the product of his sick imagination. Suddenly, he remembered living with his mother in a seaside village as a child, where he befriended an old retired sailor. This sailor once told him he had seen a ghost ship. When Ralph, already steeped in disbelief, laughed mockingly at such a hallucination, the old sea wolf frowned and sternly remarked, "Do not laugh, my boy, at what you do not understand. I repeat, I saw the ghost ship and its captain with my own eyes. The gaze of the ghost sent shivers down me. One might say that this dreadful harbinger of death suffers from its ominous mission. Then I alone survived the shipwreck. And now the very man the old Joe Smith called a ghost sits with him at the same table, his sad, profound eyes, which had made the brave sailor tremble, looking at him with a slight irony. Indeed, it was enough to drive one mad. Bitter regret that he had blindly plunged into this labyrinth of unknown secrets gripped his heart with sorrow. Yet, the deed done, he must bear its consequences with courage and dignity. Morgan wiped his damp brow and, to distract himself, asked, "Do you know, to hear the story of Viserys and the true reason for his wandering life?" "No, I do not know the details of his life. I only know that he was entrusted to deliver a vial containing the essence of life to a person destined to become a member of the community and who had already undergone the first initiation. Hasurus, having somehow learned he carried a powerful substance, drank it himself. Then, terrified by his complete misuse of trust, he fled, fearing the vengeance of the teachers, whose power he knew well. But, I repeat, the details are unknown to me." Glancing at the clock, Dahir rose from his chair. "It is late, my brother, and we shall do well to go rest. Despite the gift of endless life, we too need sleep, this priceless boon left to us from ordinary human existence. Moreover, I must confess, the memories I've stirred have tired my soul, if not my body. Inexpressible sadness and fatigue resonated in Dahir's voice. Pouring a cup of wine, he drained it in one gulp, and then, leading Morgan to a small cabin where a hammock hung, returned to his own quarters. Morgan hurried to lie down. His own head felt heavy, and he felt an urgent need for rest and oblivion. How long he slept, Morgan did not know. He was awakened by the touch of a hand and a resonant voice saying, "Rise, Supremati. We are approaching the goal of our journey." "Oh, I must have slept a very long time," exclaimed Morgan, quickly jumping from the hammock. "Yes, quite long," Dahir replied with a smile. "Dress quickly and let us go to dinner. Otherwise, you risk remaining hungry until tomorrow morning." When Morgan entered the cabin where Dahir awaited him, he saw a luxuriously set table. Sitting to dine, he asked his companion, "Tell me, Dahir, who prepares such exquisite dishes for you? And when do you procure the fruits and other fine things I see here?" "I make no purchases," Dahir replied. "How so?" "I have servants at my disposal who supply me with all necessities." "Where are they?" "They are never seen," asked the astonished Morgan. "The day will come when you shall see them, my brother. But do not ask too much at once." The young man realized that he had once again touched upon a mystery in which he would be initiated later. He fell silent, regretfully looking at the pale, melancholic face of his companion and his large, thoughtful eyes. Dahir inspired him with the liveliest sympathy, and he resolved to befriend him. Having eaten and drunk, the two went out onto the deck, where the silent and focused Ivanovna already stood. To avoid disturbing the old man's contemplation, the young men moved to the ship's bow and gazed at the calm and tranquil ocean. The night was wondrous. The moon shone so brightly that all objects could be clearly distinguished in the distance. When a black mass of rocky island emerged from the water, Dahir smiled and said, "Behold, the palace of the Grail. Indeed, it seems to me I have been transported to some dreamland," noted Morgan. "Everything here defies reason. Were I to tell anyone in London at the clinic that I sailed on a ghost ship to the Palace of the Grail, among the Society of the Eternal Jew, my colleagues would immediately put me in a straitjacket and lock me away as one of the most dangerous lunatics. Oh, I fully understand you, for I have undergone all these excitements, only in a stronger and more burdensome measure. You, Supermati, are a man of the 19th century, a skeptical but educated man. Imagine the condition of a wild pirate, dropped into such an environment, unable to read or write, incapable of reciting the Our Father without error, and with only the vaguest notions of the Grail and the Eternal Jew. Over the long centuries of my wandering life, I had to learn everything, catch up with civilization, and follow its discoveries. Against my will, I became a modern man. Time moves me without aging or granting death. But if I were to leave my ship and mingle with the crowds, I would most likely be considered a dangerous sorcerer. Dahir fell silent, his thoughtful gaze fixed on the mysterious rocky island, whose bare and jagged outlines were sharply outlined against the dark azure of the sky. Look, Supermati, do you see the white, shining point there at the very top of the cliff? That is where Laura waits for me. Supermati, as we shall henceforth call Morgan, laid a hand on his companion's shoulder and, slyly peering into his thoughtful eyes, said, I begin to suspect that the hatred of beautiful Laura long ago turned into love, and that she waits so impatiently not for an enemy. Dahir sighed. It is true. She loves me and longs to unite with me. And that makes you sigh? Do you no longer love this lovely creature? Or is she no longer beautiful? If possible, I would like to see her through a telescope. Why not? Look, Dahir replied with a slight smile. In 3 leaps, Supermati descended into the cabin and returned with a telescope, which he aimed at the white figure becoming clearer and clearer on the cliff. Great God, she is beautiful, like a heavenly vision. Is it possible that you do not love this charming woman, waiting so faithfully for you? No, I do not love her. Had she not struck me with a dagger, I would have remained as I was, and Ahasuerus would not have thought to reward me with immortality. I would now rest among all my ancestors, Dahir replied, his face quickly darkening. Between Laura and me stand her curses, which have forced me to wander and which all her love cannot erase. I would like to love a mortal being, a gentle and fragile woman, like a butterfly one fears to lose, not this eternal memento mori. As for beauty, it no longer has the influence over me it once did. In my veins no longer flows the fiery and reckless blood of a reveler. When you, Supermati, thoroughly study the arcana of secrets, you too will reach such calm subjugation of the passions. A slight shiver ran through Supermati's body. He already feared everything he would have to see and study, and all the trials undoubtedly prepared by the mysteries of unknown science. He was now encountering the third immortal man, and none of them seemed happy with their immortality. The endless time stretching before them seemed only a burden. At that moment, Ahasuerus approached, and the ship stopped, touching the cliffside. Supermati looked inquisitively at the elder, who slowly called his name aloud 3 times. In Ahasuerus' dark eyes shone great intellect and energy, but not the slightest hint of happiness. The occurrence drew his attention, and he watched with curiosity the illuminated entrance to the mysterious place he was about to enter. Everything that followed happened exactly as Dahir had described. The boy led Supermati to the room where he spent the night. In the morning, He was dressed in the order's garments and led to a great hall, where the astonishing service mentioned by the Dutchman took place. When the high priest summoned Supramati, he approached, trembling with excitement. The elder anointed his head with red essence and then said, "Heir, chosen by Narayana, you are accepted among the brothers of the round table of eternity. Now place your hand upon this cup and swear that you will answer only the truth to the questions I shall pose to you." "I swear," he replied, pale. "Are you of honest birth?" "Yes, I am the only child of blameless parents." "What were your relations with them? Did you indulge in bad passions?" "I loved my mother with all my soul and honored my father's memory as he deserved. As for my life, it was simple, full of work, and disturbed only by one illness. I was a psychiatrist and can swear that I always treated poor patients according to my reason and knowledge, as I loved the academic career I had chosen." "Does your soul seek the truth?" "Yes, I have always sought the truth and believed in immortality, despite the materialist views instilled in me by school. I have nothing to confess in crimes or excesses. Only upon dying did I take the elixir of life, placed at my mortal bed by the tempter, whose name I now bear," said Supramati. His whole body trembled strangely, as if an electric current emanated from the cup under his hand, piercing his arm and body with shocks. The high priest looked upon him favorably. "You stand, my son, on the first step of the great ladder, and you come to us pure in soul and body. No vice nor crime binds you. No hatred or curses weigh upon your head. But you have taken the primal matter and must bear its consequences. Tell me, which path would you wish to follow in your long life?" For a moment, the young man's shining gaze rose upward to where the bright blue sun looked down upon him. "I would devote my long life to serving humanity," he then replied with his clear and resonant voice. "I wish to continue my former path, enlightened by the light of your knowledge, to combat cruel death, which mercilessly takes beloved and useful members from grieving families. Finally, I would wish to truly learn to heal mental illnesses, which rob a person of their most precious gift, reason." The high priest drew Supramati into his embrace and kissed him, while an invisible choir sang a joyful and solemn hymn. Then the elder turned to the assembly and joyfully said, "I am happy, brothers, to present to you a member of our community who from the first moment of his acceptance has shown such noble intentions. In his soul burns the immortal flame of mercy, and he wishes to use the knowledge he has gained to serve humanity. I bless you, my son, for you have chosen a useful and honorable path that will allow you to rise high on the ladder of perfection." He took from the altar a heart-shaped, ruby-red stone, inside which a flame seemed to burn, and hung it around Supramati's neck. "Receive, brother Supramati, this great talisman healer. Heal the suffering, never refusing them your aid. Now allow me to give you a few pieces of advice and remarks concerning your near future. You have not yet truly lived in the broad sense. Poor laborer, ill, doubly forced to conserve your strength and avoid temptations. You cannot be sure that you will not succumb to them. Do not forget that you are human and possess all human weaknesses, especially since the essence of life you have taken renders your powers so inexhaustible that no madness or excess can deplete them. But in order to acquire the clear calm needed to soar in the higher realms of pure knowledge, it is necessary to drain the cup of life and study the passions that agitate the world to which you will return. Therefore, immerse yourself among the frenzied crowd. squandering their physical and intellectual energies in the marketplace of life, where all is bought and sold and where ego reigns supreme. Vanity blinds these unfortunate, wounded, and infected ones. The price vice pays its adepts. They dance above their open grave, unaware that their feet already slip into the black abyss. You must also learn to observe with the calm of a sage and the indulgence of divine mercy the hellish and expressive dance of the blinded crowd, which, in its eternal pursuit of new sensations, spins with an idiotic smile on its lips, oblivious to withering faces, graying hair, and the approaching hour when they will be called to account for lives wasted on excesses. And so, go forth, my brother, and cast yourself into the whirl of life. When you shall have subdued all your feelings, when your blood shall have changed its very nature, and the radiations of your purified thought shall lift you above that human herd I have just described. When at last all the preparatory work is completed, then you shall be capable of opening the great book of higher knowledge and seeking the cause of causes. One last question remains for me to ask. Which of the brothers here present do you desire to choose as your guide for the first initiation, when the hour comes and you wish to withdraw into solitude and begin the work? Morgan's gaze wandered over the brilliant assembly, over the youthful and beautiful faces smiling at him in friendly welcome, over the venerable and noble elders, and finally rested upon Dakir. Clad in white, he no longer bore the somber, ominous aspect given him by his black garment. His handsome, pale face and large eyes, filled with submissive sadness, seemed to Morgan ineffably sympathetic. May I choose the one who came for me and led me here? A look of joy and astonishment lit Dakir's face. Very well, said the elder. Let him be your first guide. Dakir approached Morgan and kissed him fraternally, and all those present came to congratulate the new brother. A moment later the elder, who seemed to be the head of the assembly, said, My brothers, one duty still remains for us to fulfill. We must sever the bonds that still connect the traitor Narayana with the work he abandoned, returning to the invisible world before the appointed hour that awaits us when our mission is complete. All stepped back and formed a wide circle, in the center of which two boys placed a tripod filled with burning coals and a shallow little bowl containing a white substance. Then the high priest approached, set the bowl upon the coals, and poured into it several drops from a vial he drew from his belt. Instantly distant thunder was heard, and the hall became utterly dark. Suddenly a bolt of lightning shot down from above and ignited the coals upon the tripod, which flared up with flames of many colors. A column of smoke rose, then fell to the floor and began to coil in spirals, recalling the rings of a gigantic serpent. A veritable tempest broke out. Thunder and lightning follow one another without pause. The earth trembled and seemed to shift beneath them. From all sides strange and terrible beings appeared. Some were winged, with the heads of sphinxes or birds. Others crawled, with human faces yet bearing an expression of bestial cunning and infernal malice. Supermati leaned against the column, watching with curiosity and fear the repulsive swarm crowding about the tripod and filling the air with shrill, rending cries. Suddenly, with a hiss and a crack, a purple cloud pillar appeared, which parted and revealed a human figure. Its outlines, and especially its head, stood out sharply against that blood-red background. A stifled cry escaped Morgan's lips. He recognized the stranger who had once appeared to him. A flaming red band connected Narayana with a blazing tripod and the mysterious fire that now released an overpowering aroma. I have shattered the bonds I could no longer bear, declared Narayana's resonant voice. But I have harmed no one, and I have found in my stead a man more worthy to take my place, whom I have made my heir. You desired freedom, and you shall have it. It is for you to repent your deed, not for us to mourn an unfaithful servant of truth, replied the high priest, raising his sword in both hands. He spoke several words Morgan could not understand, and the sword, swift as lightning, fell upon the fiery band binding Narayana to the tripod. A terrible cry rang out, accompanied by thunderous crashes, and Narayana's figure burst into 1,000 sparks. The pillar of fire and smoke whirled above the tripod for a moment. Then everything vanished, the darkness dispersed, and the rays of the sun once more flooded the vast hall with joyous light. Morgan felt as though he had witnessed all this in a dream, though the empty, extinguished tripod attested otherwise. With a deep sigh, he turned, and only then saw Nara standing among the other women, Laura among them. The young woman's flashing gaze was clearly seeking the tall figure of Dakir in the crowd. At sight of his betrothed, who seemed to him now even more beautiful, Morgan's heart beat wildly. He was about to approach Nara when the high priest beckoned him and asked kindly, "Have you accepted Narayana's inheritance? Do you agree also to become the husband and protector of his widow?" "Yes, that is for me the dearest and most sacred part of his inheritance," Morgan replied. Deep within, he was greatly pleased by this necessity, for Nara truly fascinated him. "In that case, come forward, and I shall unite you." Two boys, having removed the empty tripod, placed before the altar a purple cushion embroidered with gold. Two women approached Nara, one bearing a wreath of white flowers Morgan had never seen before, the other carrying an extraordinarily light and transparent veil. Lifting the bride's hair, they joined Nara's hand with that of her future husband. Nara and Morgan knelt upon the cushion. Two armed knights stood at their sides and crossed their swords above their heads, the tips of the blades of flame with a small golden fire. The high priest took from the altar a small dish and ignited upon it a colorless liquid that released a sharp yet pleasant fragrance. After performing several incensings, he placed rings upon the wedded pair. Then, raising Nara, led her into the sanctuary behind the altar, concealed by a curtain woven of silver threads. A few minutes later they returned. Nara seemed agitated and, lowering her head, took her place again upon the cushion. Then the high priest broke an ivory rod above her head, saying, "I destroy the past. For you, Nara, only the present and the future now exist. Be worthy of your new life. Be faithful and loving, that you may at last obtain your freedom." Sharing a cup of wine between them, Supramati and Nara rose. "Go now upon the same path. Fiery bonds unite you, and nothing shall part you henceforth," said the elder. The two knights took the newly married pair by the hands and led them to the doors of the hall. The others also dispersed. "Until dinner we may enjoy each other's company," said Nara in her usual careless, mocking tone. Morgan was too happy to take notice. "Would you like to come to my room?" he asked joyfully. "Why not? Lead the way." When they found themselves in Morgan's room, he drew Nara into his arms and kissed her, murmuring, "I never dreamed happiness would come to me so soon. Is it such happiness to inherit a widow, and an immortal wife at that?" Nara remarked mockingly, freeing herself from his embrace. "I consider it happiness, and I would like to decide with you at once where we shall live." "At this moment, Venice does not seem convenient to me," said Morgan. You are in too great a hurry, supermati, forgetting what we agreed upon earlier. The world knows us only as ordinary people, and today's ceremony has no meaning for it. Until the end of my official mourning, we must remain strangers to each other. After that, we shall celebrate our engagement and wedding like everyone else. For now, travel, visit the great capitals, and amuse yourself. How cruelly you speak, Nara. And at the very moment when the law of this great brotherhood has united us, I will not insist. I respect your will, but our separation grieves me deeply. You forget that the elixir of life has not deprived you of a single masculine instinct. Our separation seems hard to you only because you have never yet lived, healthy and wealthy, in a great city full of temptations and inhabited by an entire army of women who exist solely by debauchery, open and professional, like actresses and courtesans of every rank, or hidden, as practiced by society ladies. All this world, courtesans and unfaithful wives alike, always hungers for a young, handsome, and especially wealthy man. You, on the other hand, forget that I am a married man. Nara smiled with contempt. Oh, marriage has never yet been an obstacle either for a man or for a woman who wishes to ensnare him. The queens of the stage consider it a special triumph when they manage to pluck a fop caught in their nets, to the detriment of the family that remains in the shadows so as not to embarrass their lovers. Most lawful wives have not the slightest idea of the virtues of their husbands, of their gallantry, generosity, and indulgence, which they display toward these priestesses of Venus. Only in their boudoirs could the lawful half learn the true nature of her lord and master, who nowhere is so tedious and capricious as beneath the conjugal roof. Do not be surprised. I speak nothing but the truth. You, supermati, are still naive and inexperienced. But wait and see what will happen when you arrive in Paris. Take up residence in the secluded hotel Narayana left you, and word spreads through the city that a nabob has arrived. Friends will appear from every direction and strive to entertain you. And what more noble entertainment is there than patronage of the talents with which the theatrical bohemia teems? You have not yet tasted the pleasure of being one of their own behind the scenes, of timely offering some jewel or bouquet, of arranging an excursion with those ladies, and the supreme reward of wearing in your buttonhole a flower bestowed upon you by some stage star. However dirty the hand that gives it, you will consider it purified by talent, and will compare that splendid, enchanting fairy disdainfully with your lawful wife, that foolish, restrictive creature who even dares to claim certain rights and demands over you. Morgan listened in speechless astonishment. The sharp bitterness in Nara's voice and the dark fire leaping in her eyes showed that long-repressed feelings had just burst forth. Narayana must have deeply wounded this woman with the eyes of a sphinx to inspire in her such scorn for the most sacred bonds uniting human beings. Only now did Morgan understand why she had not shed a single tear upon hearing of Narayana's death. It is unjust to lay the same blame upon the guilty and the innocent. Nara, he said warmly, I see that another has caused you much suffering, but I, believe me, am too deeply imbued with a sense of duty to neglect the obligations I have taken upon myself today. Nara laughed her light, enigmatic laugh. Oh, duty, how elastic a notion, and for men it is merely a synonym for selfishness. A man always puts first his obligations to himself, and the most sacred among them is to conceal from his wife all the secret adventures of his intimate life. in order, naturally, to spare her sorrow and not disturb the peace of the home. Everything I say, Supramati, does not apply directly to you. At present, I do not demand fidelity from you. And until the moment when we unite completely, you may consider yourself a free man, live and enjoy every pleasure. In so long a life, one must try everything and learn everything. And the freedom I give you until our return to Venice spares you the need to invent a mass of lies to conceal and excuse your infidelities with false oaths. How can you, Nara, wound me so deeply by attributing to me heaven knows what? By what right do you assume that I, who have passed the most perilous years of youth in honest and laborious striving, shall now begin to lead a mad and dissipated life? Because you have not yet been tempted by the two most dangerous seducers, health and wealth. You refuse to understand that the elixir of life in no way alters our human nature, our passions and weaknesses. We are vulnerable to every sorrow, every desire, and every bitter aftermath that torment the human heart. Only we do not find solace in death. We remain prisoners of the flesh, eternally renewed by an unknown vital essence, prisoners of our stubborn instincts that refuse to die. No, no, Nara, you are unjust and ungrateful toward the wondrous gift that has secured our life. I, on the contrary, see it as a blessing that we retain the ability to love and to hate, to feel grief and joy. Without this endless existence shielded from death, the sword of Damocles hanging over every living creature would be empty and tedious. And besides, the separation of body and soul is an operation more than painful, terrible even, and only the chosen ones endure it with resignation. A time will come, Supramati, when you will regard death as a deliverer. Look more closely at the members of our brotherhood, and you will be convinced that most of them are wearied by the long pathway of life and thirst for change. Perhaps someday I too shall reach such weariness, but present my heart is full only of trust, energy, and gratitude that such a vast field of useful work is open before me. I can only glorify God for it. Only one desire remains to me, to convince you, Nara, that love, that pure and divine feeling, can heal all wounds of the soul. Yes, if it were truly what you imagine it to be. But love between man and woman is an eternal struggle of opposing interests. Selfless attachment is felt only toward children, friends, and animals. But let us end this conversation. I have, for now, a firm conviction on this matter. I consider all men to be traitors and cynics, indulgent toward every vice by which a woman can please them, yet merciless toward any impartial judgment concerning their own person. I must confess that our first conjugal conversation has not been particularly flattering to me, remarked Morgan, half irritated, half saddened. I shall endeavor to compensate you when we are united and officially celebrate our wedding. Nara answered with her usual light, merry laugh. By that time, I shall try to imbue myself with love and trust so thoroughly that I shall not even suspect your virtue, and I shall be as obedient, blind, and enamored a wife as you could possibly wish. The chime of the bell, summoning them to the meal, interrupted their conversation, and they went to the dining hall where the assembled brothers honored the union of Nara and Supramati. 2 more days passed as though in a dream. Morgan explored the mysterious palace, whose magnificent adornment filled him with admiration, and he became acquainted with his new brothers. In conversations full of interest The hours fled like minutes. Shortly before the time appointed for departure, Nara had a final conversation with Supermati and advised him to proceed directly to Paris, while she herself chose Venice. She also gave him the address of the house owned by Narayana in the capital of France. But the young woman categorically refused to correspond with him, insisting that she wished him to consider himself entirely free. Then, having taken friendly leave of him, Nara departed, and he saw her no more. When night came, Morgan, Hazurus, and Tahir boarded the ship, and soon the mysterious island vanished into the mist. The next morning it appeared that Hazurus had disappeared somewhere, and the phantom vessel was rapidly approaching the shores of France.